welcome to episode 3 of WooWoo for the Skeptic. I am your host, Kim Polinder. Join me each week as I explore the world of spirituality and metaphysics. I will be interviewing experts in the field to shed some light on the mysterious world that lies beyond what we can see. This week's episode will be focused on 5 Element Acupuncture. To find out how it differs from traditional Chinese acupuncture, stay tuned. By now, everyone is familiar with acupuncture, and most of you out there have probably tried it at some point. Today, I'll be interviewing a 5-element acupuncture specialist, and if you're like I used to be, most of you have probably never heard of 5-element acupuncture. I would describe 5-element as quote-unquote spiritual acupuncture. I call it spiritual because the points in 5-element represent gates that can help assist you with mental and emotional goals versus physical relief. Not that 5-element cannot assist with physical ailments, but the physical ailments can often be a side effect of being out of balance in our emotional body. When I first tried 5-element acupuncture, I didn't have any intentions in mind. I just knew that I needed some sessions to continue my healing, and my practitioner knew exactly how to lead me down that path. I ended up seeing him for about 10 sessions over the course of 3 months. And my sessions focused on a wide range of goals, such as opening up creativity for writing and painting, releasing fear of being seen and heard in a public forum, building confidence, learning how to draw boundaries, balancing my overgiving with others without getting my needs met, and learning to find my voice in expressing my individuality and beliefs. With 5-element, you can pretty much set any intention you can think of, and I will say from personal experience, the results are very immediate and permanent, provided you have a reasonably healthy personal life to nurture the shifts and anchor in the changes. My interview today is with Mieko Sie. Like many acupuncturists today, she also incorporates other energy healing work into her sessions. For today's show, we will focus specifically on the tenets of 5-element and hopefully pique the interest of listeners who do feel drawn to it. So please enjoy my interview with Mieko Sie, and thank you for listening. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I am pleased to introduce Mieko Sie. Mieko was fortunate enough to be born and raised in San Diego. She attended San Diego State and received a Bachelor of Science in Communicative Disorders and Speech Pathology and Audiology in 2001. In 2004, she became a massage and holistic health practitioner, and in 2008, she graduated from Pacific College of Oriental Medicine in San Diego and is California board certified. Also in 2008, she finished her certification in Classical Five Element Acupuncture, which is our topic today. Today, currently, she is an energy worker and most recently got certified in Huna energy work. Mieko, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So first, let's talk about your personal background and just how you got into the world of energy healing and 5-element acupuncture.
Sure. So I really started my journey, I think definitely before I even started really fully immersed in the world of acupuncture. Let me start back even further than that. So I was in my undergraduate years of school and I was doing a lot of sports. I was doing triathlon and I ended up getting a sports injury and I just couldn't be on my feet. I was in a lot of pain. I had a stress fracture. And so I really wanted something that was more alternative because the sports medicine doctor told me at the school, said, just take some ibuprofen, take some vitamins and, you'll be fine. And I just really couldn't bear the pain. And I know he was doing the best that he could with the resources he had. So I had nothing against him. And so I actually had asked somebody and said, why don't you try acupuncture? So I ended up going into that and receiving acupuncture. And I initially had traditional Chinese medicine acupuncture, which is also very great. It's really great symptoms-based type of acupuncture. So if you have pain, if you have a stomach ache, if you have different issues, it's really great for that. And it's another type of acupuncture. And so I really loved it because I actually felt so much pain relief and the stress that I was going through at the time. Many people have stress. So the type of stress that I had going on at the time, I received that type of acupuncture. It worked really well. And so I ended up going into acupuncture itself. So I went to Pacific College of Oriental Medicine, went there as a master's program that it's still, they still have the master's program as well now. They now have a doctorate program, actually. And so that was back in 2003 is when I started acupuncture school, actually, and 2004 was when I was certified doing massage and holistic health. It came to me that I wanted to do something a little bit different with acupuncture as I was receiving it and I was learning how to do it in school. I felt like there was a missing piece and I wasn't quite sure what it was. And I went to a practitioner and I really, really loved it. And his name was Brian Bender. And it was very just different. Energetically, and we can talk about energy, of course, too. Energetically, it just felt very different. It felt like there was a piece of emotion that I could actually gain help with in this type of acupuncture. And so I became really fascinated with it. And I went into the program and became certified. That really, really changed everything for me in the world of acupuncture. It really changed how I was looking at patients. And it really actually changed how I felt with working with that energy, quote unquote.
Yeah, and my experience with Five Element is similar in that, to me, it struck me as more of a spiritual or emotional healing versus the traditional acupuncture, which is more physical. Is that fair to say?
I think so. And I do think that there is an emotional level they do treat at. It's just not very emphasized. And that's where I felt like I really wanted more of. And I feel like maybe you have that same feeling over it. It's just worked really well working into that emotional part. And it felt so satisfying in that aspect.
Okay, so this is the first show that I've done on acupuncture. So if you don't mind, let's first talk about acupuncture just from a general perspective, such as can you describe meridians and how acupuncture works?
Okay, sure. So meridians are located all over the body in Chinese medicine. Meridians are actually something that's located all over the body. They're correlated with each organ system. So, for example, your lung meridian it starts on the very tip of the index finger, and it goes along the medial side of, like, towards the body, along your finger, and it goes along the inner part of your arm, all the way actually into your actual lungs. And so it's on both sides, both hands, so they go into each lung. So you have meridians located everywhere on the body. And I had found from one of my professors when I was in acupuncture school that there's actually there's influential points that are on the body. I always wondered, how in the world did they figure out these points and why they were so influential? Like, for example, there's a point on the lung meridian for asthma, and that actually can influence helping calm down the asthma, alleviate it. And I always wondered, how in the world did they find that? And this professor had actually mentioned that there were some very intuitive people that were very in tune with their bodies. And so they really could feel that it would go to their lungs, or it would go towards, or actually just alleviate the asthma. And so just little things like that. So very, very influential points all over the body. And so you have another example, you have your stomach meridian, starts on the large toe, and it starts on the lateral, which is going away from you, the lateral part of your toe. There's a point there, it starts there, and goes all the way up the lateral side of your leg, and actually internally to your stomach. So they're all over the body, and they somehow found out that these would influence different issues. And for now, modern day, they've actually done fMRI studies, clinical studies, and they had found, so for example, they would do acupuncture on the gallbladder meridian, and quite a few points on the gallbladder meridian influence the eyesight. And so they would actually see the occipital part of the lobe light up when they do points. Yes, so it's actually a substantial marker that it really does work with our nervous system and directly with our organs too, which is pretty amazing.
That is amazing, yeah. So the needles, they penetrate a certain number of layers of the skin?
Yes. So, different types of acupuncture will actually go into a certain degree. So if you have a more aggressive type of acupuncture, they can go much deeper. However, considering the parts of the body as well, we have to be very, very careful of how deep the needle goes in. So if you have something around the lung area or the upper back area, we could only go in a certain amount and a certain angle as well too. So if you were to go into areas that had more tissue, such as your hips or your gluteal areas, then you can go in a little bit deeper. And the needles are very, very thin. They're very hair fine for most of the part. The gauges, which is how the circumference is, how large the circumference of the needles are, they're very, very thin in comparison to the needles that you would find over at the hospital. So they have hypodermic needles in the hospital, which are microscopically at a point. And if you were to come to an acupuncturist, they're microscopically at a filiform angle, meaning they're microscopically serrated. So they go in with a much smoother depth. And a lot of the times when people come in, you feel like a heaviness, you feel pressure, you may feel a tingling feeling going down your legs or your arms. And that's not due to nerve. It's actually due to just the sensation of the trigger point that you're feeling. It's very different from the hospital. And a lot of people feel a little anxiety because they feel like they're going to feel that. And usually a lot of people go to sleep. They're sleeping on the table or they're about to fall asleep. So sometimes drooling. I mean, a little bit, that's kind of funny, but it's nice to see that people actually get really relaxed during treatment.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about 5 Element then and its history and how long it's been used.
Okay. So Classical 5 Element was actually, it's very, very old as well as traditional Chinese medicine. So it is known to be thousands of years old. And there was actually an Englishman who had actually founded this type of acupuncture. His name is J.R. Worsley. And in the 1940s, he brought it back from China to England, and he practiced it there. So he learned it from a couple of masters in China, which actually is a mystery, according to Classical 5 Element Acupuncture. So we've tried to question and find out from different practitioners. JR actually, he knew these practitioners, and so there's a lot that JR did learn from these practitioners. He brought it back from China, and he brought it to the UK. So the type of format, the type of way that they used this acupuncture, it wasn't the type of way that was actually permitted in China, actually. So they wanted the more formatted system of traditional Chinese medicine acupuncture, and so it was not allowed to have, it was kind of underground, actually. It was not really traditionally used in China out into the mainstream society, so people had to know where to go and get it. So in the 1940s, he brought it back, practiced it in England for several years, and then the way that acupuncture was brought into the U.S. was because when Nixon had actually gone to visit China in the 70s or so, one of his advisors or somebody on his staff actually received acupuncture because he got really sick. And so it became something of a newsworthy event and brought it to the U.S. in that way. People started practicing it and learning it and becoming licensed in it. So that was how it traveled over here.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because to me, when I first heard about 5 Element, I had never heard of it, and so it definitely isn't as well known as the traditional kind. So how would you explain the difference and how it does differ?
Okay. The way that traditional Chinese medicine differs from Classical 5 Element is, well, first of all, you stay with the patient the whole time. The difference in so traditional Chinese medicine usually will find the signs and symptoms, and you'll see that, they have a cough or they have a stomach ache or there's certain symptoms. And so we have different diagnoses in traditional Chinese medicine, for instance, like spleen qi deficiency or liver qi stagnation. And so there's a certain set of points that you put in for that, and that's great. And it does work to a degree. It's also very effective for certain populations that really do love it. And there's also Classical Five Element. So Classical Five Element, when you come in for a consultation, we find out your signs and symptoms. And for a bigger part of it, we find out how your emotions are doing. And so we look at those emotions and we diagnose with color, odor, sound, emotion. So color of the skin next to the eyes, that tells us what organ system is out of balance. The sound of the voice, that's usually the sound of the voice, which will tell us which organ which may be out of balance. The emotion, which may be out of balance as well. Color, odor, sound, emotion. I think I've got all this. So, for instance, to take an example of it, let's see, if you're coming in and you have depression, and for when we look at depression, it could be any of the elements actually that can be out of balance. However, just to give it more of a cut and dried version, we see, oh, okay, maybe they may have we take their pulses and we find out where their imbalance is as far as where their organ systems may be out of imbalance. Maybe they're not circulating properly, but mainly pulses I'll go into a little bit. We look at the color of the skin next to their eyes. It could have a more of a reddish color or lack of red, which is fire. It could have, so if you're looking at the odor that they're emitting, the odor of fire is scorched. And actually, you could smell a whole different array of scorched people. So it's not just like a burnt toast scorched. It could be another type of scorched. The sound of their voice, they may feel like, you may actually feel with them, that, oh, they're very depressed, they're very sad. There's a lack of laughter, because usually there's a laughter or a lack of laughter, and then their pulses too, we do take into account. But it's, for the most part, color, odor, sound, and emotion. We take in all those elements, and then we actually initially find out if there's any certain major blocks. We unblock those right there on the spot. We don't leave the needles in. The needles go in and they come right out. They don't stay in traditionally, just like traditional Chinese medicine would. Classical Five Element, they actually go in and they come right out. And so people usually feel a pretty instantaneous or gradual difference in how they actually feel. I think that's the main difference. You actually feel more of a palpable difference much faster than if you were to leave in needles for a longer period of time. Some people feel very drained. They feel tired with them being left in for a very long time as well, if they do receive traditional Chinese medicine acupuncture. However, maybe that's the style people need sometimes.
And that was my experience with Brian. As you know, I had my sessions with him, and I worked with him over maybe a few months. And most of the sessions, they were just the needles in and out, and then I was done. It was definitely different in that way. He also told me that my primary element, he talked about primary and secondary elements, and so my primary was fire, and it was being fueled by my secondary, which is wood. So can you talk a little bit about people's possible elements that they're made up of and how maybe treatment varies depending on what the element is?
So with each of their elements that they have the primary and the secondary. The way that we find that they have the primary and secondary, first of all, is you come in and you gain the rapport with the patient. So we really sit there and we get to know that patient. We gain the rapport, and, that way they can kind of let their guard down and we can actually see where their emotions are. And for instance, for you, I'm just making up an example here. So coming in, he could see all those elements of color, odor, sound, and emotion. And then quite possibly he could see that there maybe even, like, for instance, using the odor, like the scorched smell of the fire, there's actually an underlying smell that can be within there. So we do use a lot of like scent within there when we're diagnosing. So you may have had an underlying rancid smell, to be honest. So it could be. So I
Not the first time I've heard it, but that's okay.
Yeah. So I mean, well, it's pretty funny because you're like, oh my gosh, rancid? How could that even be possible? But it's like, it's a really subtle rancid though. So it's just something that kind of comes up. And if when people come in, they may have elements of, in talking about fire, it could be about relationships, to be honest. So that's where fire comes in. It has to do with relationships and the actual sanity of the person too, and other aspects of fire. So he was treating you more on the relationship side of fire, not to go into personal treatment of you, but relationships. And, if you were primarily talking about that, quite possibly, and then, picking up on the scent, and then maybe how your emotions were, for example, maybe you were overjoyous, or maybe you were, lack of joy. And we say lack of joy because it doesn't always mean depression. It can mean that there's just not a lot of joy. And then maybe he found a couple of elements of wood in there because quite possibly maybe there was some frustration or anger. Because with wood, when we're looking at wood, we see it's an element of when it's out of balance, it has frustration and anger. But on the other aspect of it, it has to do with future planning and decision making. So he could have seen that in the rapport with you, and also the underlying smell and the underlying feelings of frustration as well. And then maybe looked at these sides of your eyes and saw the lack of, it's actually interesting, green. So when we look at wood, we look for the color green. Could be a subtle color of green or a very, pronounced color of green as well too. I'm so sorry. Going back to, you said possible elements. So personality elements. So let's see, going back to wood, just like I said, frustration, anger, they may be out of balance with, and then they have the opposite side of it, which is future planning and decision making. And those are liver and gallbladder. So those are the two elements that they're associated with. In going in with fire, there's actually 4 different organ systems that are associated with fire. So fire actually is associated, like I said, with relationships. It can also do with the sanity of the person. So you have pericardium, which is the covering of the heart, but we actually consider that a separate organ in the body. Sanjiao, which is our water pathways, our metabolism, our circulation. Heart, of course, that makes sense. Heart is fire. A lot of people, if they're familiar with acupuncture or 5 elements, then heart is part of fire. And then also small intestine, which is breaking down and being able to assimilate into the body. So that's the small intestine, which is fire. So scorched is the smell. Red or lack of red that we see on the side of the eyes. And lack of laughter, lack of joy, or overjoyous, actually. So those are the different elements on that. The elements of earth. Earth is the mothering element. So it's nurturing, it's very sympathetic. And with earth, that has to do with the organs of spleen and stomach. So we don't always mention pancreas, although I really believe it's implied in there, because it really does go with that whole system. So spleen and stomach, quote unquote, pancreas as well too. Sympathy, lack of sympathy, oversympathetic. So those are all the different types of things Earth has. So they're very mothering. So when they're out of balance too, there's a lot of worry that can be, you can actually see that a lot there in their emotions. And the color is yellow. It's the color yellow that's located right next to the eyes. So when I talk about the color, by the way, if you think about a paint bucket and you drop a color of paint in there and it kind of mixes up, once you mix it all up, it's just like you see this subtle coloring in there. So that's kind of how we look at it on the side of the eyes. It's just a really subtle color, and we usually look at it in the sunlight or in some natural lighting, and that usually helps us see. The odor of earth is fragrant. And now it almost sounds like, oh, that would be the best smell to be of all of them, to be fragrant. Well, it could be like so many different types of fragrant, like maybe an over-fragrant person kind of almost smells a little bit like vomit, and it sounds bad, but it can also be like that. So that's the color, that's the earth element. So, and it's not necessarily a bad element, it's just that it's a mothering element. It's the way that we care for people, our sympathy. Metal it's a very interesting one. It is the organs of self-worth, and those 2 organs are lung and large intestine. So lung and large intestine are, interestingly, the organs of letting go. It's actually when we see people and they're having issues with their metal element, We can see that they have trouble letting go. They are grieving over things a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean death or dying. It's just that they're grieving in life. And it goes along with that of self-worth. We tie those in together because they're grieving over us. They're not seeing that they have, there is worth in their life, kind of like that, if that makes sense. They're not inspired. So if they're out of balance, they have like a very cutting type of out of balance. Almost like, if you will, like they want to get the last word and they kind of cut you off. With the smell of metal, you'll usually smell rotten. There's a subtle sense of rotten, almost like actually our mentor, Neil Guminick, who's the one that I actually learned all of this from. He said that it's a different, interesting way to describe it. He said, have you ever been in New York City? And he said, I think it was something about putting out the trash, like on trash day. And there's like that, almost that smell of like the wafting smell of the trash outside. He says it's just like a little whiff like that, where you actually smell that off of the patient. And the colors associated with it are white, or silverish almost. So there's like a white underlying color. And water is, last but not least, is kidney and urinary bladder. So these are the elements of fear and anxiety when they're out of imbalance. And on the other spectrum of it is courage and strength and will. And so groaning is the voice that you'll hear. There's more of a groaning voice, like a deep groaning voice when people have it out of balance. They're not able to voice themselves. Maybe they kind of are like deer in headlights. They're not able to speak. They're just very stopped in their tracks, I guess, if you can say that. The color that's actually around the sides of your eyes that you see is a bluish color, whatever variation it is, and putrid is the smell, actually, to water. Let's say, for example, there's a vase with flowers in it. You know, you're walking by the vase and you kind of get this little whiff of smell. There's like a subtle sense of putrid to it. So it's kind of like that, like stagnant water. That's usually what you'll smell when it's out of balance. So people won't always smell like this. And actually, when they become more in balance, any of the elements will become less intense. And so people's emotions, as they shift and change, as their health shifts and changes, just like how Western medicine will actually diagnose as well, you'll notice that their smells change too.
Okay, that's very fascinating, yeah, especially how certain organs are associated with certain elements. So is it fair to say that the organs that your element is associated with are more susceptible if you're out of balance? Like, are those the organs that you're going to treat when you treat them?
Yes, exactly. So when you're more susceptible and out of balance, then that's the organs that you would treat. So it really is true that people actually have all of the elements within inside of them. It doesn't mean that they don't have any of these except for just those two, you know, if they're their primary and secondary. They actually talk about this where they say that they could actually learn this early in life, and some believe that you can actually have it from birth. Going into things of karma, it could be from past life as well too. So we do talk about how it's varied in how people believe where it actually came from birth or before birth, if you want to believe that too. So yes, really, really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. In my first session, he did something that's called connecting my soul to my body. So, and I heard that doesn't always happen with first-time clients, but can you explain a little bit of how my soul would have become disconnected and what's the process that he used to connect it?
So the soul can be disconnected. There's not actually a treatment that's called connecting the soul to the body. However, I know that there are certain ones that really will connect the soul back in. So if we're talking about there may be a trauma in somebody's life and then they become completely disconnected from their body. By being able to give an example, I had a patient one time and she had severe trauma from abuse when she was a little girl. I remember doing something called doesn't sound as bad as it seems, a possession treatment. The protocol that we have when we put the needles on the body is we have them on there. We actually do keep the needles in for that treatment, for that specific treatment. And I did notice some interesting things when I was there, I'm watching her actually as the needles run, because I don't like to leave the room when I'm doing a really strong treatment like that, just to make sure she feels okay, she feels safe, and if she feels any sensations in her body. So I did notice that she felt uncomfortable. She felt like it was almost as if the comfort of her was just not, she just started to not feel safe almost. And she was moving around so much because at first she felt like she had to put her arms around her. It was almost like a safekeeping to keep her safe. And so she started moving around. It almost seemed like she was, wiggling around. And then I kind of thought back and almost associated a little bit with how she was actually tied up and she was put into a closet. And that didn't really, it almost seemed like she was unraveling, if you will. It's almost like she's kind of coming out of that state. I almost sometimes see correlations with people if they're trying to get out of a certain state that they were in before.
Mm-hmm. And is the disconnection of the soul, or really seating the soul in the body, is that something that needs to be done regularly? Is it something that's where the soul can easily become disconnected throughout the life?
It can be disconnected, and I think we see that a lot with patients. And just to kind of correlate it with my own style and how it actually started to unravel when I started treating more people with Classical Five Element, when you look into their eyes, you can actually see more of their soul and see if it's more there. And I remember Brian teaching me, and he said you can really see if they're present in their body. And if you can't see their presence there, you'll know. I could really see that she wasn't really there. Her soul was not really able to be present with me. And I know that we talk about things like being grounded, being more relaxed, if you will, so grounded. She had that aspect of her, but it really didn't feel like she was really in her body. And so after the treatment, you can look around into the eyes and you can look and see that the color's back in the face. So it seems almost like there's a soul connection that goes back in the body. I do feel like people do feel disconnected from their soul time to time. And I don't feel like it's often, but there are some patients, certain patients that seem to feel that they're disconnected and it's hard to get back into their body. So they'll not only use Classical Five Element, they'll even use other things like energy work, which is some of the things that I do to help assist that. Some of the Huna energy work that I bring in, or whatever other type of energy work people use, I think it can really help connect them back into their selves and really feel that they're in their bodies. Because a lot of the times, I think in everyday life, and this is just maybe my own opinion, that we become so disconnected to our bodies and we can't even feel the sensations that we have that are going on, and to feel more grounded in ourselves. And just on another note too, a lot of the points actually have names associated with them. So you have points on the chest, which are associated with the kidney. There's one specific point, well, actually two, they're on both sides of the chest, that's called spirit burial ground. And it's translated from that in the Chinese pinyin, they call it the Chinese pinyin translation. So when you do those points, it's actually to help open up the spirit, open up the soul connection. So when people are a little more dead and buried in life, there's no way to access them. When you look into their eyes, then you can do those points and it actually helps bring them up and out. And I have seen people just literally almost come alive to get the points done. Now, it sounds miraculous. It sounds amazing, and it really is. And I think it just reacts differently with each person. I've seen people progressively get more in tune with the acupuncture with Classical Five Element, or I've seen them, instantly feel very, very different. I think whether or not they're in touch with energy or chi, if you will, or their bodies, I think people can all feel it just on different levels and be more in their bodies.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Any listeners out there who are trying to decide, is this something I should try? Can you talk about maybe some client examples of reasons people came to see you for Five Element, or maybe some general things that Five Element can assist with for anyone who maybe wants to try it?
Sure. It's interesting. It's almost like people find you rather than you finding them. I tend to feel like I believe that more and more now. And so majority of my patients are fertility patients. They usually come in for, wanting help with assistance in maybe their IVF, their in vitro fertilization, and they hear how effective it is. For example, I have a patient and she had come in and she was wanting to be assisted with her IVF cycle or IVF treatments. If you treat somebody before and after an IVF treatment, an IVF transfer, embryo transfer, it's actually very, very effective. A lot of the times there's an over 50% chance of effectiveness rate. I used Classical Five Element on her, of course, I wanted to help her with her emotions and to help her through the process. And so, yes, it helps on a very biochemical aspect. It can really help relax the nervous system. It helped relax her nervous system right when she came in. It helped her anxiety. It helped relieve her anxiety, although it really helped her on a really deep soul level basis because it helped her feel more in her body and that she was able to go with the ebbs and flows of getting the whole fertility process done because it's very, very stressful. So I see a lot of women for that reason wanting to get pregnant, very, very common, and I use Classical Five Element for that. They're able to sleep better. She came in with sleep issues. She came in with digestive issues. She came in with just general anxiety too, to just really calm her down because she had gone through another IVF cycle before she had come in. This was a year before and it was unsuccessful. So this time she came in and actually I just had found out 2 weeks ago she's pregnant. So
sounds like just anxiety in general. I know I've had many clients who struggle with anxiety. Sounds like Five Element would be something great for someone like that to try.
Yeah, definitely. So let's see. So another example, somebody coming in, they have really intense digestive issues. So for one patient I had, for example, he came in, he had just unexplainable issues with his digestion, and I'll get a little more, just a tiny bit more graphic, that he had really, his bowels were very hard to control. So he had quite often diarrhea, and it was just very, very often. He'd get his muscle or his stomach would cramp up a lot, and it was just really, really uncomfortable. So doctors did blood tests, they did all these different things, and they said they couldn't really come up with anything. And then I had found out on another level that he had a lot of anxiety, and that was an underlying thing that he had going on his whole life. And then big major life shift change, and so the anxiety intensified. I was able to treat him and his anxiety, and actually the digestive issues it's on a much more manageable rate. Now he's able to eat and not have urgency going to the bathroom. He's able to sleep better. It just comes down just for, just those little things, even life quality that can come down to the emotions and how it's so very psychosomatic a lot of the times with our body, where our emotions can play into our body issues. And I think that's also speaking for a lot of other alternative treatments. So how our body can manifest symptoms from emotions.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you've done a fantastic job of just going into perfect detail about the differences in Five Element. And for anyone who's curious out there, I hope they do look you up, because for me personally, I can say that the things you talked about fire and wood elements, seeking out certain types of solutions in life are definitely what I was being treated for. Anything from, being seen on a more public level and reaching my goals, being more creative, opening creative blocks, and that sort of thing was really beneficial. So.
Oh, that's so great, Kim.
Yeah. And now, before I let you go, I wanted to switch gears for a minute. I have a few questions that I ask of all my guests so that listeners can get to know a more personal side of you.
Okay.
So, the first question is, if they made a movie of your life, what would it be about, and what actor would you want to play you?
Oh, wow, this is fun. Okay, so what would the movie be about? I think... Gosh, this is really fun. I love this, Kim. So I think it would be about a person who felt like this ordinary person in life and, struggling in life. And, everyday person, she really felt like there was more to life than just how she was. And she changed herself through some of the different things that she did. She helped change the world. I don't know. And her little way that she did help heal people. And I'd like to say it'd be a biography.
Yeah, very resilient, like a superhero.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, superhero. We'll add that in there.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Any actor in mind who you'd want to play you?
Oh my gosh, the actress. Who's the girl on Renee?
Renee Zellweger?
Yeah, because I just like her. Yeah, I think she'd be funny and I think she'd be empowering.
Yeah, very relatable. Yes, definitely. So, well, the second question is, what was the worst thing you got in trouble for with your parents?
Oh, boy.
Is the list too long?
Let's see, worst. It's not the worst of what probably people have heard. I think the worst was actually when they found out that I was smoking pot when I was in high school. And then my dad got so mad and he sent me to his best friend, and I had to sit in front of him, and he had to give me the talk of, you shouldn't be doing this. You need to clean up your act, and why don't you become a person in business and do that? And actually, he did. He added that in there. Why don't you become a person in business and, work for a company? And anyways, it was just interesting. It went from not doing that to, okay, what career do you want?
Yeah.
And so, well, it could be worse, but that was the worst experience.
Yeah. Maybe career advice at that age was the worst kind of punishment that you could have had. So
yeah, 16, 17, I don't know.
And okay, lastly, what is the number one thing on your bucket list?
Oh boy, number one thing. Oh gosh, I'd have to say it'd be going back to really making a difference in a lot of people's lives and helping them change. I think mainly that's the biggest part, and I really want to do it on a much bigger aspect.
I love that. Yeah, go global.
Yeah, global, however that is.
Yeah, well, hopefully this interview will be a great step towards that goal. So,
it'd be great.
Yeah, well, thank you again so much for coming on the program. I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best in all of your endeavors and your practice.
Thank you, Kim.
Oh, and one more thing. If listeners want to contact you to schedule a session, how can they find you?
They can actually look on Mieko-Sie.com. That's Mieko-Sie.com. And you can find me there.
In today's WooWoo news, EWAO.com published an article on June 8th of this year on the existence of meridians in the body. Scientists at Seoul National University confirmed the existence of meridians, which they refer to as the premovascular system, which they said is a crucial part of the cardiovascular system. The research team captured photos after injecting a special dye which colored the meridians. By injecting the dye into the acupuncture points, they managed to see thin lines, and these lines did not show up at non-acupuncture points where there aren't any meridians. From their findings, the analysts learned meridian lines aren't limited to the skin, but are a concrete channel system through which liquid flows. And this liquid disperses to form stem cells. Illness is thought to be an obstruction in the energy flow of these channels. Acupuncture, as well as things like shiatsu massage, qigong, tai chi, and yoga, have all been found to increase electrical conduct in these channels to relieve obstructions in the energy flow. So it appears highly likely that we do, in fact, have both a physical and bioenergetic body. Thank you for tuning in to WooWoo for the Skeptic. For more on the show, visit woowoofortheskeptic.com, or for more on me, check out kimpolinder.com. And now for your moment of woo. This quote comes from Dr. Kenneth Ryland, who was the personal physician to President Nixon. Quote, "I am convinced that acupuncture is going to be one of the greatest contributions that any group of people has made to the future of all medicine, if it is handled correctly by the people of the Western world." Unquote. Have a great week, everyone.